Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan Kennard. I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Watershed Coordination Council. It's great to see everyone on Zoom. I wish that we were all in person, but I don't think we're too far away from that point in time where we kind of reconvene in our more traditional fashion. So I think we're all excited and looking forward to that point in time. Just some housekeeping things to get us started here. So everyone is familiar at this point in time with Zoom, but just make sure that you try to keep yourselves muted throughout the meeting, except for the breakout sessions we have for the last hour of this. We will have opportunities to get in small groups and have some discussion, but otherwise, just make sure to keep yourselves muted. But with cameras, we would love to see your faces, so feel free to turn your camera on if you'd like to kind of engage and interact with us visually. It'd be great to see you. And then, as I said, with the breakout sessions, obviously you can have your cameras on during that time and have your audio on as well. But if you don't plan to attend the breakout sessions, we are just going to ask that during our break that we have at 11 o'clock before those start, that you just go ahead and log off from the meeting so that as we put people in the breakout rooms, we don't have any empty spaces in those rooms. So as we get started here, just wanted to run through our agenda. We've got 3 hours here this morning that I think we're going to use every single minute of. So I'm going to try and keep things rolling, but I'm excited for all the information we have to share with you all and all the updates that we're going to get from our partners. We're going to kick things off with introductions, followed by some highlights with MWCC and just kind of sharing what we've been up to lately. And then we're going to do a short presentation with some guest speakers on the Watershed Fund. And following that, we are then going to also have some updates from our partners, hopefully with Montana Association of Conservation Districts, someone from that organization can make it, and then also with Montana Forest Collaboration Network. We're going to have an hour-long panel session at 10 o'clock with some federal and state agency partners to give us some status updates on the federal infrastructure funding, just so that we can kind of hear the state of that and start seeing what we need to do to prepare for this influx of funding that's going to be coming down. And then related to that, we'll have a series of breakout sessions where we'll get in small groups and have some discussion on some of the opportunities that we can do to kind of take advantage of this influx of funding, because I think it's something that's in the forefront of all of our minds right now. So we'll start off with introductions. Since we have a large number of people here in the meeting, we're not going to have time necessarily to do formal introductions. But if you want to change your name in the participants list, you're welcome to add your affiliation so that as you scroll through the list of all the attendees, you can see who else is in the room with us here, and feel free to use that chat box too if you'd like to communicate with one another. But first, I'll introduce our staff with MWCC, and then have our board chair, Zach Owen, jump in and introduce our board members. As I said, my name is Ethan Kennard. I'm our executive director. We also have joining us this morning Terry Nichols. She's our watershed programs coordinator, who you'll see in just a little bit later in the meeting. And then not joining us, but also on our team is Kiera Davis, who has just joined us again to help with some of our communications and outreach work. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Zach Owen, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Zach, feel free to jump on here.
Great, thanks, Ethan. Well, to start out, if all the MWCC board members who are present, if you want to raise your hand, I'm guessing everybody knows how to do that. Sometimes it's different, but under reactions, there should be a raise hand, and that'll bring you all up to the top. I'm going to try to name and shame the ones who I don't see show up, but boy, we might get them all. I'm trying to think, who are we? I'm going to put myself on the spot here to see who we're missing. I think Dusty Olson isn't here yet. Who else?
Jordan Tollefson isn't able to make it. He's got a conflict.
Okay. And is Robin?
I'm here, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay. So yeah, I think this is our second annual virtual annual meeting, and boy, I'm not sure what we're at otherwise, but second annual, we'll see whether or not it's the last. I think, like a lot of you, we've been doing a lot of thinking and recalibrating on, taking this time to see, just sort of rethink all of our meetings, all of our events, and not just do them the way we've always done them, just because we've always done them that way, but see how to move forward with them. So this may turn into something sort of virtual, but we'll see how that goes. There is some reason to be optimistic about getting together in person again, which is great, but like we've all seen, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So we've definitely, MWCC's been real busy over the last year. The end of 2021, we saw several board members term out, and so we've got a lot of new faces on here. I'm pretty excited to see what we'll accomplish with this new board. So yeah, I think that we're going to continue to provide a lot of information, opportunities, connect, and to learn. We've got a lot of grants through the Watershed Fund coming up. So that's sort of serving between this and those, serving our core mission of our goals of supporting, connecting people, providing information. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got. I'm excited to just get into the content. You can hear what MWCC has been up to, and then hear about all these funding opportunities, and hopefully we'll see some good projects get on the ground here. So let's get into it.
Awesome, thank you, Zach. And I also just want to thank everyone, all the board members who were able to make it this morning, and recognize too all of the former board members that we've had over the years that are also joining us. So if you'd like to raise your hand as well, we'd surely like to recognize you. And also just want to point out that we have a lot of program related committees too, such as the Water Committee and Watershed Fund Committee, that have some non-board members. So I know a lot of you are joining us from those as well. So we just appreciate all of your support for MWCC, and we're glad that you can make it and join us today. So with that, I think we'll get into just a little bit of content updates from MWCC. Let me share my screen once again. Also, I should warn everyone that just before this meeting started, my computer gave me a notice that it wants to update and restart. So hopefully this doesn't happen during the middle of the meeting. Hopefully it doesn't take over, but okay. So as Zach mentioned, the last couple of years, I guess we could characterize as, the pandemic years. And I think we're all kind of looking forward to turning a new chapter and seeing what we have in the future as we can get back to a different way of doing things. And, as I mentioned, I think one of the things that we're all thinking about a lot right now is this influx of funding that we're going to be seeing to support natural resource work and infrastructure work. And a lot of this, still has to be worked out, and things are still rolling out. But I think we have a lot of reason to be optimistic over the next several years. And certainly my goal with MWCC is to work with all of our partners, local, state, regional, and national partners, to see how we can get as much of this money into Montana as possible, and to see what we can do to try and kind of facilitate a lot of good projects in communities and watersheds around the state. So that'll be the focus really of this meeting. But before we get into that, I want to just share some updates and highlights from MWCC. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with a lot of the work that we do, but I think it's always a good reminder just to share all of our successes and our accomplishments with all of our partners, because every one of you that are attending here are a part of that work too. So from our strategic plan that we updated last year, we have 4 focus areas with MWCC. We provide support, connections, inspiration, and representation to watershed partners all across Montana. With support, Zach mentioned the Watershed Fund. That's probably one of the more exciting things that we've put together in the last few years. And we will have a special presentation on that in just a little bit. But just to give a little background, for last year, we were able to subgrant over $200,000 to watershed conservation groups throughout Montana through 37 different grants that we awarded. We have some more funding available this year. Some of that is already in motion, and some we are currently in the middle of fundraising for. So we'll have more information on that available throughout the year. But one exciting opportunity I do want to share is that we recently started an agreement with Montana Forest Collaboration Network and Montana DNRC Forestry Division to subgrant $100,000 to forest collaboration work across Montana. So the first application round of that is actually open right now. That closes on Monday, February 28th. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to just put something in the chat box. We'll send out a link to that information if anyone's interested in applying. They're small grants, they're $5,000, but a really good opportunity to support forest collaboration work to help implement some of the actions within the recently updated Montana Forest Action Plan. And we will have an update from someone from MFCN just later on here too. Other things we do to support conservation work is just working with our grantors, trying to coordinate. We're going to be trying to start doing a little bit more with this to coordinate, especially with our state funders and also federal funders in the light of this federal infrastructure funding. So we'll hear more from some of those folks a little bit later on. We're at the 11th year now of the Big Sky Watershed Corps. There are 43 members in the state right now, which just shows the success of that program and how much growth has taken place. And Terry Nichols, our watershed programs coordinator, helps support that program with MWCC. Another way we provide support is through our website. We are a small organization supporting a statewide network. So our office in a lot of ways really is our website, I think. So that's where people go to find resources and get help for things. And so we recently updated our website last year. I hope you've all had a chance to look at that. I think it's a big improvement from what we had before. And on that new website, we're continuing to add some new resources in the coming months. We're going to be adding a resource library that has some things to provide capacity supports and technical support for groups that are implementing projects. And also we're working with Future West to do an in-person capacity building workshop this May. So we'll have more information on that, hopefully in just the coming weeks. With connection, I think this is one of the things that people probably first think about when they think of MWCC. I know that my personal experience was, MWCC through the annual meetings, through the symposia, through those different events. That's how I really met people in the watershed world. And I think that's probably true for a lot of folks. And so even though we haven't been able to meet in person as we would love to, we still try to provide ways to connect partners around the state. So the Watershed News is one of those resources that we have this, I think, really valuable for providing information, funding opportunities of men's careers and such forth to all of our partners around the state. Another thing that we've recently done to try and facilitate connections is our lunchtime conservation conversation series. And so those just a once a month opportunity to connect over lunch with a guest speaker and just ask questions and just kind of have some face-to-face time in a kind of remote setting, but just to get us connected in a sort of informal way so that we can kind of just connect with our peers. We just had Jeff Ryan speak on some restoration work that he was done yesterday with stream bank restoration. We have one next month on geomorphology. So if you're interested in that, you can get on our website and find more information. We're also working on a couple of other things in the coming months. We're putting together an online watershed coordination forum. So that'll be a platform for watershed coordinators or other people involved in local work to ask questions of one another and just provide support to one another. There will be, I think, a lot of cool features on that, just a way to get people to interact and communicate in a slightly different way. And then finally, we're going to be working to update and provide a new ArcGIS online watershed directory map. So that will have a map-based interface for all the watershed conservation groups, probably as well other groups like conservation districts or local collaboratives, and profile what their organizations do and hopefully some of the successes and the projects that they're involved in too. We recently, last year, had our Watershed Stewardship Awards. We had so many great nominations that we ended up having a total of 4 recipients between us and the Montana Wetlands Council. So I just wanted to recognize those individuals. I don't know if any of them are on the meeting here today, but Heather Barber, Jeff Ryan, we also had a project, the Blackfeet Nation Success Project, and then Lauren Recruiter from the Wetland Council. So we just always find, that it's really important to share those successes and highlight all those successes. A new opportunity that I think is pretty exciting is we're working with a group of partners and stakeholders around the state to help fund a filmmaker who's doing a series of collaborative films based in Montana. We've actually got several of our partners in these films that are being launched later this spring or this summer. And I'm excited for those. It's, I think, a really great opportunity to share with a different audience the importance of collaborative conservation work. And Laura Tomoff, who's a filmmaker, she's doing an incredible job putting these together. She's gotten so much great footage from these interviews that she's put together for the films that she's actually launching a podcast series. And I just got a link yesterday to the very first one that was launched from a landowner and ranger in the Big Hole. So we'll certainly be providing updates on those as more of those are available. But just a quick plug, we are still trying to fundraise for that effort. And so if anyone is interested in learning more about that, we can certainly share that information with you. Representation. You know, we partner with so many organizations around the state, so many agencies, so many NGOs, local groups, you name it. And I think that's a big part of what we do is providing that coordination and representation for the watershed approach to conservation. You know, we sit on a number of kind of collaborative groups to try and sort of just be the voice of local groups and convey the needs and just try to use those partnerships and those relationships to build more support for collaborative work and for watershed conservation work. We have, you know, more partners that we can probably list on one page here, but I just threw some of the logos of our partners on this slide here. But we are working with one that I'll point out. The Western Collaborative Conservation Network is a group of collaborative support groups all across the West, and they are going to be hosting an event at Chico Hot Springs this September. So as more information comes out on that, we'll be sure to share that with everyone. I think it'll be a great opportunity to meet with other, you know, watershed type groups or other collaborative efforts around the West where we can all share information and learn. But also we're using that as an opportunity to really highlight and share all the great work that we're doing in Montana. That's the reason it's being hosted here, because we feel like we have a lot of great stories to tell, and we want to be able to highlight all of those successes. So with that, I actually stayed on time. I don't know if anyone from MACD is here. I'll go ahead and maybe start with Montana Forest Collaboration Network. Jim, if you want to turn on your camera and your audio. We're just going to take a few minutes to hear from our other statewide network partners, just to hear some updates from them and see, you know, what kind of work they're doing that aligns also with MWCC. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Jim come on here, and then we'll see if someone from MACD is here too.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm glad to be part of MWCC, and I'm honored to be part of the board. So thanks for inviting me for that. Zach, it's nice to see you here and the other board members. I also serve on the advisory council of the Montana Forest Collaboration Network. And Ethan also serves on that board as a representative of MWCC. I've been the chair of two of the collaboratives in the state, the Southwest Crown Collaborative up near Seeley Lake, and it extends over to Lincoln and up north into the Swan. And also the Lolo Restoration Committee, which works mainly on the Missoula Ranger District in Lolo National Forest. And full disclosure, our two groups are both applying for the grants that Ethan mentioned. That's a remarkable opportunity for us to be able to get some financial resources. Now, right over the other wall are a couple of workers who are sanding down my kitchen. Is there a lot of noise coming through my mic? I'll try to be brief. Maybe I can get them to stop. Just 1 second here. I'll be right back. Okay. You know, doing a kitchen remodel when it's 5 below is really a bad idea. Okay. So you live and you learn. Nevertheless, the Montana Forest Collaboration Network is an association that provides services and information to the 23 forest collaboratives throughout the state. They're all over, mostly in the forested regions, but there's a series of them that have become quite active in being able to offer their ideas and come to some agreement to provide counsel to the Forest Service, the DNRC, and other landowners on what local citizens expect from the forest. We have annual meetings. We have a very open membership. We have an open advisory committee. If people want to join that, it's very simple to do so. And representatives of watershed groups are particularly welcome to that. A couple of things that we have coming up, and I won't take too much time. We have joined with the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership, IFRP, to hold joint meetings in the spring. And we're having a Zoom meeting on April the 12th and 13th, which is free registration. So you can go to the Montana Forest Collaboration website, which is just montanaforestcollaboration.org, or the IFRP website, that's the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership, and register for that. And that theme is going to be what is going on with the infrastructure bill. And we're having, a major set of speakers from Washington, D.C., including 2 senators, to be able to talk about how the expectations for these resources are going to be met out on federal lands. So April 12th and 13th, I think that'll be a really interesting conference, and you're all welcome to attend. Some of the other services that we provide are facilitation services for some of the groups. And I know that that's a request for many of the groups for this funding that's coming through MWCC, as well as we have a series of issue papers. They're called dashboards for some reason, but they go over a whole series of policy issues, whether it's wilderness or endangered species, or what's going on with wildfire and fuel reduction. So you can go to the MFCN website, and there's a drop-down menu of these, very brief reports. They're 2 to 3 pages. So if you want to know about carbon budgets in forests, and you'll get the classics comics version. These papers are reviewed by experts, so the quality of the information is good. They are not science papers, but they're for a lay audience, for people who are interested in understanding at least the contours of an issue, and they could be helpful for members of our group, the MWCC, to figure out what it is that we know about some specific major policy issues. Finally, just like everybody through COVID, we haven't had our own annual meetings. Those are typically in the fall. Ethan has been a major contributor to those meetings. They're often in November. We hope to get back together face to face this November for our annual meeting. It will be held in Missoula this year, so there'll be more announcements about that forthcoming. But it's great to have these connections between the forest collaborative groups and the watershed councils, because we do a lot of similar work. And again, I'm delighted to finally be a member of the board of the MWCC, and hopefully make those linkages even stronger. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jim. And it's great having you on board. We do have Rebecca here. So up next, we'll have Rebecca Boslow, the Executive Director of Montana Association of Conservation Districts, give a quick update too.
Thanks, Ethan, for having me on, and apologies. I am not able to turn my camera on right now, but I wanted to give a quick update from MACD. So, and I'll keep it quick, I promise. Just a couple of things. So MACD is the Montana Association of Conservation Districts, and we support and represent conservation districts across the state. There are 58 conservation districts. In terms of updates, I just wanted to highlight that we have undergone a strategic planning process and have basically kicked that off and are underway operationalizing that, doing some organizational updates and thinking longer term. Other things worth mentioning within that is a couple of things we work on are the legislative piece. So the interim session is one of the biggest things we're working on right now at MACD. So when you think about that represent piece in terms of district, we do a lot of policy and advocacy for conservation districts. Last session, I will give a brief review of last session, was pretty huge for conservation districts. There was a significant struggle in terms of funding due to the decline in coal severance tax. And so we were able to help support and push through House Bill 374 to temporarily provide funding to districts that has already provided conservation districts, the conservation district account within DNRC, around $1.7 million, which is over half the budget. So that was a critical legislative win last session. And then we also wrote and supported a study bill to study conservation district funding. And that leads me into the interim session. And that is one of two study bills that MACD and districts are very involved in this as well individually, are working on during the interim session to consider potential funding sources for districts moving forward, since coal severance tax does not look promising. We also have an interim study bill on erosion on the Flathead River that is in the Water Policy Committee. And so I won't go too far into the legislative stuff because that can be a bit of a rabbit hole for me. But we do have updates on everything legislative policy and advocacy on our website. We have a policy blog that includes all of this information. So I would direct folks there, and also please feel free to reach out with questions. The next interim legislative meetings of the Water Policy Interim Committee and the Environmental Quality Council are happening in March. So they're coming up pretty quickly. And we will keep working on finding a long-term funding solution for districts. So that is our main legislative priority now and will be as we move into the 2023 session. A couple of highlights from our grant making and programs. We also run a number of programs for conservation districts and their partners. We provide funding for river councils, and we are a partner on Big Sky Watershed Corps with MWCC as well as Montana Conservation Corps. I do want to highlight that our water quality and education mini grants are open right now. So it's the 2022 Water Quality Education and Outreach mini grants. And well, they aren't open quite yet. I should say they open on March 9th and run through Friday, April 15th. And the funding max limit is $4,000 per applicant. And these are focused on education and outreach efforts for non-point source pollution. And they funded a lot of activities such as water and land management workshops, youth field trips, educational media, stakeholder involvement efforts, and demonstration projects. So I just wanted to highlight that for you all because that is an upcoming funding opportunity. Beyond that, I just wanted to mention the upcoming events that MACD has annually with our districts. So we will have our annual spring board meeting in Helena in June, and a lot of partners come to that, and we do a lot with state directors, state agency directors, and other state partners. We have area meetings coming up in September and October, and we are having our annual convention in Helena this year in November. And I believe the dates on that are the 15th through the 17th. It's that third week of November. So with that, I'm going to cut myself off before I go too long. Thank you for having MACD on, and please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Thanks.
Great, thanks Rebecca so much, and Jim as well. So we're gonna sort of transition now into a little presentation that we are gonna do on the Watershed Fund. We're now starting the 5th year of actually administering the Watershed Fund. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity, especially, segueing into the conversation we're going to have and the updates we're going to learn about related to infrastructure funding. We thought it would be a good opportunity to promote some of the work that we've been able to do with all of our partners to help get funding, from federal, state agencies, but also private interests into on-the-ground work and into capacity building efforts for local watershed organizations. So I'm going to share my screen once more. So as I mentioned, we're now in the 5th year of the Watershed Fund. I don't know if everyone's necessarily familiar with the Watershed Fund, so we're going to do just a quick overview of that, and also be able to show you what some of the accomplishments have been so far of that funding. And then I'll introduce Terry Nichols to then kind of facilitate a discussion we're going to have with a couple of guest speakers who are going to present on some of the projects they've actually implemented as a result of the Watershed Fund. So the fund itself is supported by numerous different types of entities, from federal agencies to state agencies, and also the private nonprofit sector. So I've listed all of those supporters in this box here, but really, I mean, the Watershed Fund exists because of those investments and because of that support from those agencies and those organizations. But essentially, the Watershed Fund is a sub-granting program. So we work with those partners that help support the fund, and then we have different programs that sub-grant into smaller awards, funding for things like capacity building, professional developments, and also on the ground projects. So the goal that we had when we had set out to start the fund in 2018 was that by the end of 2022, we would have administered and awarded $1 million to watershed conservation efforts. And I should mention that those efforts are comprised of watershed groups, conservation districts, and also forest collaboratives and other community-based conservation efforts, including also tribal governments and tribal entities. But that was the goal. And now we are starting off 2022, and we've actually administered now just over $850,000 with the support of all of those partners that were on that previous slide. A lot of that has been for on the ground project work, but then also we've had quite a few grants going toward capacity building and also professional developments. And I've listed those grantees that we've been able to support through the fund on this slide. In all, we've been able to help 55 organizations with that support, which I think is pretty phenomenal. Through that, some of the impacts of that have resulted in these metrics I've put up on the slide: 183 conservation practices or projects that have been implemented, 385 stream or lakeshore miles that have been improved, over 10,000 acres improved, and more than 6,000 stakeholders engaged. So when you look at that total investment of just over $850,000, I think that's a pretty good return on that investment. And that doesn't include also the leveraged funds. I think oftentimes, these smaller grants, provide really good match for other funding sources. And so, I think that would also be, if we had this number up, you would also see that there's a lot of match funds and a lot of leveraged funds that come from some of this seed money from these Watershed Fund grants. One of the goals when starting the Watershed Fund really was to try and fill the gaps that exist. We realize that capacity funding is probably the most requested and most needed thing that local community watershed organizations are in need of. And so that really is one of our continued goals, is to build up the amount of funding we have for that capacity support. It's currently one of the smaller programs that we have through the Watershed Fund. You can see on the slides that I put up here that we've so far awarded over 2019 through 2021, awarded just over $115,000, which is less than half of the request that we've had through those capacity grant programs. And so you can see the unmet need is still pretty substantial. And this is capacity building support that goes towards things like strategic planning, things that are kind of more difficult to fund through other more traditional funding streams that are more project or program focused. The goal of the capacity funding really is to kind of help support groups in order to allow them to get into a position where they can start planning and executing projects. And without some of these things in place to kind of get the organizational structure or board structure in place, I think it sometimes will result in maybe less effective implementation of projects. And so we're trying to fill some of those gaps. And you can see on the slide here as well that I've listed some of the things that we track from groups that receive this capacity building funding. And of the groups that have received funding, 92% have reported back that they've been able to improve their relationships with other funders as a result of that. They've also been able to strengthen their stakeholder and community engagement, improve communication with partners, all of these things that are really critical for building support for watershed conservation work that then results in that implementation and that on the ground project support that is more readily available through some of our federal and state programs, and is going to be even more available through this influx of funding with the federal infrastructure law. And so I just wanted to point this out because, as we look at the millions or billions of dollars that are going to help support all of this infrastructure implementation work, I think it's important that us and our partners are still working to try and provide this capacity to local watershed groups to then make sure that they can help all of our state and federal partners actually implement these investments into watersheds throughout the state. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Terry to talk a little bit more about the details of the Watershed Fund, but also then introduce our guest speakers to give a little bit more kind of practical, on the ground impacts of what this funding is really meant for their organizations and for the work that they do.
Just had to find that unmute button. Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Nichols. I'm the Watershed Programs Coordinator with MWCC, as Ethan said, and I do manage the Watershed Fund. It's good to see you all here today. Obviously, the numbers Ethan just shared tell a story of the impacts that the Watershed Fund is having for on-the-ground projects, and also in terms of building the capacity of local communities to carry out those projects and to improve watershed health. But as I think most of us know, numbers alone can't convey the many benefits of this funding for local communities and conservation organizations. Nearly every grant we've awarded through the Watershed Fund, whether it's for $2,000 or $20,000, has a backstory of community and natural resource benefits that don't always show up in the numbers. These are partly stories of how MWCC is just making natural resource grants easier to access and manage for small community-based conservation organizations. Much of this funding, including our project support funding from NRCS and our capacity support funding from private foundations, as well as the Big Sky Watershed Core funding from DEQ, simply wouldn't be available to these small groups without the Watershed Fund. In a recent grant report, the Lolo Watershed Group stated, quote, "This fund is a fantastic resource to a small watershed group. The application is not time consuming, which is great. It can be done by a time-strapped volunteer board. So many projects to keep a watershed group afloat depend on matches and are project-based, but this grant has given us the capacity to actually apply for the project grants. It's such a nice fit." And just a couple other quotes, the Musselshell Watershed Coalition said in their grant report, "This funding source is specific enough to fund really targeted projects, but flexible enough to fill gaps that other sources are unable to fill." And the Big Hole Watershed Committee on one of their project grant reports said, quote, "The most challenging part of many projects is the grant process. MWCC makes that process manageable and efficient so that work can get done on the ground." Watershed Fund supported projects also build trust and relationships that are leading to more conservation work and better outcomes for communities and natural resources. Often these small projects might be one of the first projects that a group does. And several local conservation organizations that I've spoken with about their grants note how small projects supported by the Watershed Fund have brought together private landowners with state and federal agencies, as well as larger nonprofits in really positive ways, often for the first time. I was talking with Laura Nolan from the Musselshell Watershed Coalition recently about one of their project grants, and she told me, quote, "I feel like there's momentum in the watershed. People recognize now the power of having a conversation and building a relationship." Through our project funding partnership with NRCS, which I mentioned earlier, several watershed groups are increasing and enhancing the impacts of NRCS's own funding to private individuals, private landowners, as well as their local counties' long-range natural resource planning efforts. This includes the Bitterroot Water Forum, the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group, and the Gallatin Watershed Council, among others. And finally, a small anecdote from the Carbon County Conservation District's Watershed Fund supported project. They said in their final grant report, quote, "It was great to see the two engineers from a local engineering firm come and help build the project. They volunteered their time so that they could gain experience building these types of projects. They understand that These types of bank restoration projects are more sustainable than top to bottom rock and are willing to propose this approach to future clients. So just again, a few of those examples of those more intangible but really important impacts. And finally, a small boost from the Watershed Fund has allowed many local conservation organizations to take a big leap in their capacity to protect and restore watershed resources and to bring economic benefits to their communities. This includes hiring staff, bringing on Big Sky Watershed Corps AmeriCorps members who lead projects and programs to improve water quality, improving communications and outreach, increasing outreach to landowners, developing weed plans, drought management plans, forest management plans, all these things that don't require a ton of money, but require that seed startup and require easily accessible funds. Also allowing groups to go after bigger pots of funding and eventually developing more sustainable fundraising strategies. So that's my introduction to our next two presenters. The two people I'm about to introduce work for watershed groups that exemplify this leap I'm talking about, the leap in capacity from small watershed fund supported projects into doing bigger things and really having an impact on watershed health and economic growth in their communities. Holly Hill is the executive director of the Gallatin Watershed Council, and Tana Nolf is the associate director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. And like I said, both of these local collaborative groups have leveraged small capacity and project grants from the Watershed Fund to do big things in their watersheds and their communities. We're going to start with Holly's presentation. I believe she's going to share her screen, and then we'll finish up with Tana's. So Holly, are you there?
Yep, I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you hear me okay, Terry?
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Just find the share screen button. There we go. Okay, does that look all right?
Yep,
Okay,
you're good.
wonderful. Good morning, everyone. As Terry mentioned, my name is Holly Hill. I serve as the executive director for the Gallatin Watershed Council. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our stories and our great appreciation for the MWCC Watershed Fund existing and helping our organization to be where we're at today. GWC is based out of Bozeman. We serve the Lower Gallatin watershed, which includes the communities of Bozeman, Belgrade, Manhattan, and ultimately the headwaters of the Missouri River. I began working with GWC in 2017 as a part-time contracted watershed coordinator. As like many small watershed groups, I was the only staff for many years. And over the course of the last 5 years with GWC, the Watershed Fund has been so critical to our organization's survival and our growth and the ability for us to do meaningful work in our watershed. Since 2018, we've been fortunate to receive 10 separate MWCC Watershed Fund grants in each of the different areas that Ethan mentioned. So the Capacity Fund, the Project on the Ground Project Fund, and then also Big Sky Watershed Corps post-site cost share assistance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And in total, we've received over $78,000 from the Watershed Fund, and that's been leveraged by an additional $166,000 that's come from local partners and landowners and in-kind volunteer hours. So as Terry had mentioned, the opportunity for leveraging that money is huge, and having that being supported by local people here in our community. So I'm excited to spend just a few minutes sharing some of the positive impacts that we've seen from this funding and what that's provided for our organization and our community. So one of the first grants that we applied for when I came on with GWC was capacity funding. And we received some funding that helped us to update our logo and our website and develop a communications plan for our organization. So having this funding really gave us the ability to spend some time thinking about our mission and our niche in our community. We were able to hire a design and marketing person that would help us communicate our newly updated vision and mission through a new logo and our website. So this was really a turning point for our organization, especially working in a pretty busy watershed with lots of groups doing lots of work. So we're able to really distinguish ourselves and refresh our vision and our mission and communicate that back out to the community. We've also received much assistance with bringing on Big Sky Watershed Corps members. It's been a huge boost to our capacity. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Big Sky Watershed program and have benefited either directly or indirectly from the work that they're doing across the state. Our Big Sky Watershed Corps members have helped to expand our education and outreach programs and our volunteer programs in our community. Maybe one quick number to show some of the impact. In 2018, we held our first annual river cleanup and had 2 people attending that cleanup. With the help of Big Sky Watershed Corps members last year, we had over 110 people attending our river cleanup, and excited to continue hosting that every year and be collecting more trash and getting more people engaged in the watershed. We have also, our Big Sky Watershed Corps members have helped us start a business stewards program. So that's generated financial support and partnerships with seven separate local businesses in our community, and that program's growing. Also helped us to develop a long-term volunteer program called the Busy Beavers. Last year was the first year of having that in place, and we had over 40 volunteers that were engaged in weed pulls, river cleanups, water quality monitoring, and participating in some educational workshops. So we wouldn't have been able to host all of these amazing Big Sky Watershed Corps members without that cost share support from MWCC. And maybe most excitingly, we've been able to hire 2 of those recent Big Sky Watershed Corps members to come on as full-time staff. So this year we have 4 of us as staff and an additional Big Sky Watershed Corps member. So 5 of us in the office, which feels like a huge boost to our capacity and ability to get more work done. So we've also received a number of Big Sky Watershed Corps project, on the ground project fund grants. Some of those are specifically meant to be open to Big Sky Watershed Corps members. So this is huge for their personal and professional development, the ability for them to write the grants and do the implementation and coordination themselves. As we were looking at doing some of these projects on the ground, as Terry mentioned, the entryway for small nonprofits and small watershed groups to be doing and applying for some of these restoration focused grants can be pretty intimidating in terms of the grant applications and the reporting requirements and that sort of thing. And so we've been really appreciative of the pretty streamlined application process, and mostly for the training that's offered by MWCC to put these grants together. So a couple of the Big Sky Watershed Corps led projects that we've worked on, the first one during the spring of 2020, excuse me, our Big Sky Watershed Corps member, Brooke Hellstrom, who's now our stewardship manager, put together a successful watershed fund project to revegetate 2 stream banks along the East Gallatin River. So you'll see that picture on the left. She coordinated a volunteer day where over 4,000 willows were planted to help enhance the riparian corridor and floodplain capacity. And then the picture on the right is a project that our Big Sky Watershed Corps member last year, Heather Priest, helped to organize, and a grant that she received to implement GWC's first beaver mimicry project. So this included building beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures on Kelly Creek, which is a tributary to the East Gallatin River. Let's see. We've also received some project fund grants, which were helped to be funded by NRCS. One of the things that we've really appreciated is that a lot of the MWCC grant processes are deliberately encouraging holistic watershed partnerships. So, building connections between agencies that can be a little bit difficult, I think, for small watershed groups to navigate those partnerships and the types of opportunities that are available. And so MWCC has helped to facilitate some of those conversations and build those relationships with partners like NRCS that we should be working with in our watersheds anyway. So a couple of the projects we've worked on with this NRCS supported project fund included on the left, helping to stabilize 2 sections of a vulnerable stream bank along the East Gallatin River. And really a goal of this was to track the effectiveness of different types of restoration techniques and then communicate that back out to the community and some of our restoration projects and track that on a long-term basis. And then we currently have a grant in place, and this is working with our local NRCS office on their hazardous fuels reduction targeted implementation plan in the Bridger and Bingtails. So we were able to bring in funding to help landowners that are participating in this TIP help to mitigate weed issues. And that was something that NRCS was not able to fund through their TIP. So we're helping to enhance the existing TIP and the work that local NRCS is doing here. So as Terry had mentioned, these projects have really helped us to build our momentum and opportunities for future funding and future projects. And I hope I've been able to highlight some of the ways that this funding's been able to boost our capacity. I hope many other groups on this call are able to benefit from Watershed Fund as we have. And if I can be of any assistance or answer any questions down the road about our experiences in accessing this funding, please reach out. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. It's just always exciting to hear like the progress that you all have made and all the great work that you're doing. So I really appreciate that. And thanks for your presentation today. Next, we're going to hear from Tana Nolf, the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Tana, I think you got your slides up there as well.
Remember to unmute. Give me 1 second here.
Perfect.
Oh, it didn't work. Okay, there we go. Do you see my slides? Do they look right?
Yeah, well, you need to, I think you might, oh, there they are. Yep, perfect.
Okay, just took a second. All right. So, like Terry said, my name is Tana Nolf. I'm the Associate Director with the Big Hole Watershed Committee. The Watershed Committee is based out of Divide, which is also where I live, down in Southwest Montana, and it was formed in 1995 to address water supply issues on the river in response to worsening drought conditions and the pending listing of Arctic grayling under the Endangered Species Act. A group of local ranchers got together and quickly invited other interests to join, including outfitters and guides, sportsmen, local government, municipalities, which basically means Butte, and residents, and invited agency personnel to act as partners and technical advisors. Kind of the whole emphasis of the Big Hole is to find local solutions to local issues and shared sacrifice for shared success. So the idea that if we all give up a little bit to benefit the river, we will all benefit from that. So today we have 3 full-time staff and 2 seasonal staff. Our main focuses are drought management, restoration, wildlife conflict reduction, land use planning, and we consider ourselves a conversation hub and the go-to organization in our community for natural resource issues. And we try to be really responsive when anybody brings us a natural resource concern or issue. The Watershed Fund has definitely benefited our organization and community in a variety of ways. During the last round of project support funding, Terry told us that the Big Hole Watershed Committee was the only organization to receive project support dollars in every round. And I do have to give a shout out to my coworker, Ben Laporte, our restoration program manager, because he has really taken on these grants and these projects, and he's been with us since about 2018. And we've just seen so much growth. So he's doing a wonderful job. We're very proud and thankful for all of the grant funding that we've received through MWCC. Sorry for the toddler interruption. There'll probably be more of those. In total, we completed 5 restoration projects on 5 different ownerships with the project support dollars, and we received 1 capacity support grant, which was pivotal in getting our forestry program off the ground. So today I'll just run through some of the highlights from our projects. I have quite a few slides, but I'll be quick. So if you have any specific questions about the restoration projects, you can connect with me afterward or with my coworker, Ben. And yeah, moving on. So East Fork Divide Creek, this was a natural water storage beaver mimicry project. We installed 142 beaver mimicry structures over 2 years. We started on Forest Service land. And then as we were scoping out the project on Forest Service land, we asked for access through the Morris Ranch. And they got interested in the project and asked if we could also do some beaver mimicry on their private land. So in 2019, we came in and installed 75 BDA structures in 3 different reaches, which are the purple dots there on the photo. And then in 2020, we came in and put in 55 more, and they're really excited about it and have been asking for even more. So one of the primary accomplishments in our mind, was just shifting this landowner's perspective about this work and impressing upon them the benefits a project like this can have. So they were little bit skeptical in the beginning, but are huge champions of this project now. And the landowner is actually really excited about the potential for, as we raise these streams up, allowing them to more easily cross them on their horses. So, obviously that wasn't one of our restoration goals, but an added benefit for the landowner. Our next project was the Suan-Ram Bank restoration, which we also call the Pennington Bridge Phase 1 restoration. And this had been on our radar for quite some time, and Madison County actually brought this particular issue to our attention. There was serious concern about potential flooding taking out the bridge there. There are a lot of other influences in this section, including a lot of rip-wrapped banks upstream, and kind of a bottleneck at the bridge where the river just has to hit a certain spot there. So it's not as easy as just doing a bank restoration. But we did an initial fix there with MWCC funds, working with Applied Geomorphology and Great West Engineering, and we're now working on designing a more long-term sustainable Phase 2 solution for this area. Oh, I should say we removed 3,500 cubic yards of point bar material from that the red outline section there, and Madison County used the material to build up a nearby county road, and we also installed 13 willow clumps along the 100 feet of bank. There's just some more photos of the project. This project highlighted the importance of strong partnerships in conservation work. The county contributed a substantial amount of funds, and of course the landowner participation was very important. All right, moving on to the Melrose Riparian Planning Project. This is also on private land. So this project came to us because the landowner saw a bank restoration project we did just upstream and reached out to see what we could do on a chunk of his bank. There's a section of moderately eroding bank that was heavily grazed in the past. And when we originally met with this landowner, he wanted to do a very large restoration project. And we were able to kind of work with him to find that he didn't need anything that intensive, but really just needed some revegetation on his bank. So we planted 30 willow clumps along 160 feet of bank. And the accomplishment here was working with the landowner to see the benefits of starting small, and just kind of spending less money and hopefully getting the same impacts by vegetating that bank. All right, the Lower Bickle Stabilization and Riparian Enhancement Project. This is the last of our restoration projects to receive project support through MWCC. Well, hopefully not the last, but the most current. This project is just south of Glen on private property. And in 2019, the landowner attempted to do-it-yourself bank stabilization that didn't go so well. And there was a lot of loose, unconsolidated cobble and sediment right up on the bank. We did a BHI assessment on this bank and found that it was contributing around 36 tons of sediment per year into the system. So we treated the bank. We did 460 linear feet of bank restoration and also 21 acres of riparian juniper conifer encroachment. So a couple more photos. Again, so a big accomplishment of this project was again being able to shift the landowner's awareness on the importance of sustainable and best practice restoration. And he's been totally on board with us coming and working on his bank. So that's been really great. A lot of these, I should mention, just as a side note, a lot of these private landowners who were doing work on their land, they have also become supporters and donors of the Watershed Committee. So great impact for us. The one capacity grant that we received was for developing our forestry program. And that's been really huge for us. And we identified some projects. We submitted a landscape scale restoration grant, and we came in 3rd in that ranking. And unfortunately, they were only able to fund the first 2. But my understanding is there's some potential for that budget to be expanded, and we are next in line. So we are hopeful to get some forestry money to move forward with some of these projects in the East Pioneers. And this was big for our board because we have our monthly meetings, and it continually comes up that they'd like to see some forestry projects done and something done to address all the encroaching conifer in our watershed. So this just quickly shows some of the funding all of the funding we've received through the MWCC Watershed Fund is highlighted here in yellow. It also shows the match. So we've received about $80,000 through the Watershed Fund, and we've been able to leverage about $86,000 in matching funds. So some impacts. The main impacts of these projects for BHWC has been the ability to work directly with private landowners, change their perspectives about restoration and conservation, and build trust within the community. We're showing landowners or residents that if they come to us with a natural resource issue that they've identified, we'll visit their land, we'll check it out, we'll talk with the engineers and the scientists, we'll find the funding, we'll come up with a solution, and if it's at all possible, we'll get it done. And that's been building a lot of trust and respect and relationships within our community. We're also building trust and relationships with the outfitting, guiding, and angling community, because as they float the river, they're seeing firsthand and appreciating these riverfront projects that we are getting done. And our upland projects, we have a lot of upland projects going on too that are equally important, but they're not as visible as these riverfront projects. So this is just helping get our name out there and show the work that we're doing. Our next step, and we're working on this now, is developing signage to put on these projects so that everyone will know who's doing the work, who funded them, and how to get involved. So we're currently designing educational signs for fishing access sites and also to mark restoration sites like these. Our on-the-ground results have also resulted in greater communication reach. And actually, our YouTube channel has just experienced exponential growth in the last 2 months or so. And I put the link there, but one of our videos has over 55,000 views, which to a little tiny organization like ours in the rural Big Hole, that's kind of breathtaking. So, working on that was something we identified at our annual meeting in 2020 was just being better about sharing the work that we do and being more visible. So if you have any questions, I don't know that we have a ton of time for questions, but you can ask me now, or you can reach out to me, or if you have technical questions, you can reach out to our restoration expert, which is Ben Laporte. And if you want to learn more, there's various ways you can do that. You can visit our website. We are now doing text. So you can text Big Hole to 26989, scan this QR code to learn more about our conservation fund, follow us on social media, or you can join us the 3rd Wednesday of each month in Divide or via Zoom for our monthly board meetings. And that is all I've got today, Terry.
Thank you, Tana. Thanks so much for that presentation. I really appreciated seeing all those projects and impacts. And just a reminder to everybody, we will be providing all these presentation slides. They will be available, so you can have that information. And I don't know that we do have time for questions. I think we're passing it on to Ethan for the federal infrastructure panel.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep this rolling. But Terry and Tana and Holly, thank you so much for sharing all of that work that you guys are doing. We're gonna sort of transition now from the MWCC watershed funding to federal infrastructure funding. This has been, certainly a hot topic in recent months, and I think we're all just kind of trying to wrap our arms around what this is going to look like and what it really means. And so, to help us better understand at least where we are right now, we invited several guest speakers to come and give an update from their respective agencies that are going to be in some way involved in helping administer this infrastructure funding, just so we can kind of start building some awareness within Montana of what this is going to mean, and also to start preparing ourselves for what we can do either with MWCC or other partners to kind of just help make this funding more accessible to communities and to watershed organizations, conservation districts, and collaboratives all across Montana. So with that, we have 5 panelists that are going to join us. I will share my screen just so you can see who those individuals are. But we're going to start off with Otter Morgan from the Bureau of Reclamation, and then Kyle Tackett from Natural Resource Conservation Service. Eric Trum is going to then speak to the EPA and also Montana DEQ programs. Mark Brostrom then will speak to the Montana DNRC programs, and then also we have Hannah Schultz from Montana DES who's going to join us. But essentially what we are just kind of hoping to learn is what the status of these funding programs are and what that means for Montana, and how this is going to affect our resources, and then also what community-based groups can do to kind of be a key player in this funding. So I'm going to hand it off to Aubrey to get us started. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Ethan, thank you. Thanks for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen. Put it in presentation mode. Are you seeing my slides? Yep. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Aubrey Morgan, and I work for the Bureau of Reclamation and in Denver, and I work on the Water Smart program. There's a whole set of activities included in Water Smart, and we'll just talk about some of them today. Essentially the ones that relate to projects with ecological or environmental benefits. We've had a big expansion of those programs lately with some changes to our authorities and also the infrastructure bill funding. So excited to tell you a little bit about what we're doing now. So first, Water Smart, just generally, if you haven't heard of it before, it includes programs to improve water management under kind of a variety of different approaches. The Basin Study Program is a basin-wide study planning program looking at water supply and demand on a basin-wide scale. It's focused on climate change and incorporating the projected impacts from climate change and looking forward, and identifying some strategies to address any imbalances between water supply and demand. Our Title 16 program, this is a water reuse and recycling program. These are large-scale water reuse and recycling facilities. Many of them are in California. We have a few in Texas, and I think there's a few in Utah. Water Smart Grants, this is maybe our oldest program, and this is, itself includes a subset of activities, water conservation and efficiency grants, small scale water efficiency grants, and then water marketing strategy grants. Water Conservation Field Services Program, this is another one that has been around for a very long time, and it allows folks to do some planning for conservation projects, something that we call system optimization reviews. So you can get funding. This one's administered out of our regional offices, not out of Denver. So I think the amount and the timing of the funding opportunities varies a little bit more than with our programs that we manage in Denver. But it's basically water conservation planning. Drought response program, that one includes both on the ground projects to build drought resiliency and also drought contingency planning, and the cooperative watershed management program. So this one is specific to watershed groups. And in the past, we had a phase 1 and a phase 2. Phase 1 was for supporting the development of watershed groups, and then phase 2 was for implementing on-the-ground projects. But recently, with the additional funding and authorities we've gotten, we have created a kind of a bigger phase 2 that includes a broader set of projects, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. So the Cooperative Watershed Program, again, we've had a lot of success with this program. It's been in place since 2012. Watershed groups or their fiscal agents can apply to establish or expand a watershed group. This is phase 1, as we have been calling it. The cool thing about this, a couple cool things. One is there's no federal or non-federal cost share required. And we recently raised the amount of funding available to $200,000. So a watershed group or someone who wants to form a watershed group can apply for up to $200,000 to get going, and with no non-federal cost share required. And the activities that they can do are pretty broad as well. It includes developing the group, establishing it, and conducting outreach to get people interested, gathering data about the watershed and doing watershed restoration planning, and also project design and scoping. So it's a good way to kind of get going if you're not quite there to having shovel-ready projects. There is a funding opportunity open right now for phase 1, and it closes on March 31st. So that's something good to be aware of. Environmental water resources projects. So this is the bigger, better phase 2 that I was talking about. So in the past, we implemented the Cooperative Watershed phase 2 through a standalone funding opportunity, but about 2 years ago in 2020, our authority was expanded in the Water Smart program to include additional authority for projects with ecological benefits. So we're able to open up the funding opportunity to include not just projects by watershed groups, but also all of our other stakeholders, irrigation and water districts, state entities, tribes, municipalities and counties, and also I guess the changes also allow us to draw funding from various different programs, so we can offer more funding, and overall, including funding from the Water Smart Grant Program, funding from the Cooperative Watershed Program, and we even included some funding from our drought program. And we kind of pulled the projects from those funding opportunities that were projects related to environmental benefits, pulled them into one, so that people wouldn't be confused and could figure out one place to go for to apply for these projects that were kind of similar. They can include kind of a range of projects. The water conservation and efficiency projects that are focused on increasing water supply reliability for ecological values. So if you're going to line a canal or make other system improvements in an irrigation system, but the primary purpose of that project is to benefit ecological values or leave water in the stream, then this is a good place to come. In the past, those projects were funded under our water and energy efficiency grants, but now we're saying, look, if it's really an ecological project, come over here to the environmental water resources projects funding opportunity. It can also include projects to mitigate drought-related impacts to ecological values, things like installing fish barriers or removing fish barriers, and what else? Water quality impacts, to address water quality impacts. And then watershed management or restoration projects. Those are kind of the typical ones that you're probably all very familiar with. Stream bank enhancement, invasive species related projects, natural features, nature-based features as solutions, addressing, stream connection with the floodplain or geomorphology of the stream channel. So kind of those typical restoration projects are also can be funded under this new environmental water resources projects. We just finished reviewing our first set of projects under this funding opportunity. We got quite a few. And so we were excited to see some really good projects that met the funding opportunity. We'll be announcing those in probably another month and a half or so. Again, the funding comes from multiple sources, including WaterSmart grants and the Cooperative Watershed Program. Another change to our authority is that we can offer up to 75% federal cost share, so requiring only 25% federal, a non-federal cost share for projects that meet the criteria for that. So that is a big change for us. We've almost always had a required 50% non-federal. So, and the criteria for that include the projects have to have ecological benefits and supporting water supply reliability in particular. And they have to have been developed through a collaborative process, which could be a collaborative process such as the Cooperative Watershed Program, or could be something else. We are getting ready to post this yet again, and we expect to do so in May. So look for that coming up. Now some of the new stuff. So we had a few new authorities and also additional funding in the infrastructure bill that was passed recently. One of the new authorities is multi-benefit projects to improve watershed health. So these, the difference here, I would say that these projects are very similar to what we have been funding, what I just walked through under that environmental water resources projects funding opportunity, with some specific considerations. So according to the authority, it can include design and monitoring. So a broader scope of the type of project that we can fund. So planning and design for watershed projects, which is exciting because there's, other than the Cooperative Watershed Program, which is focused on phase 1 and watershed groups, we haven't had as many sort of planning kind of funding opportunities. So this is one of those where people could come in for project design and planning for projects to improve watershed health. The projects do need to be in basins impacted by a reclamation project. So that's something that is in the authority. We didn't make that up. It came to us, and we're going to have to figure out how to implement that. That's what we're working on right now. We're looking at how do we incorporate this new authority into our set of funding opportunities that we have. It's most efficient for us if we can roll this into some existing funding opportunities, so we don't have to make too many changes and we can get the money out the door more quickly. But we're kind of sorting through how to do that right now, whether we can pull in some of these project types into our environmental water resources funding opportunity. The amount of funding for this is $100 million in the infrastructure bill over 5 years. And it's not allocated like exactly in 1/5 increments. We get a spend plan each year, and it'll depend on what we think we're ready to spend. Last one is the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration and Protection Program. This is another new authority that Reclamation has. These are larger projects. The idea, according to the authority, is that they should provide benefit across multiple basins. And they can include actually big projects like dam removals. It's focused on habitat and restoring fish passage or removal of barriers, but it does include authority for other kinds of restoration projects and also planning and design. And this program, we have $250 million under the infrastructure bill, and the non-federal cost share is only 35%. So we're working on this program. We do not have it ready to go yet. We're working in 2022 to get a funding opportunity sorted out. And then in the fall, we're hoping to be able to post something under this program. That really wraps up the substance. I have a couple slides on the amount of funding that we have under the infrastructure bill. I'll just point out, quickly that, you can see here, we get a spend plan each year. So just a portion of the total amount, if we had 400 million for water smart grants over 5 years, in FY22, we have 160 million of that. And that's going to all of the funding opportunities that are under water smart grants. This is our schedule. So, I've included this slide so you can look at it later to see when we're planning on posting funding opportunities. Right now, I will also just quickly mention that I didn't talk about this program, but we do have an applied science program that is for projects that are developing decision support tools or modeling tools or improving modeling tools or forecasting tools. So those kinds of applied science tools, that funding opportunity is open right now, as is the cooperative watershed management phase 1. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, feel free to send me a message and I'm happy to explain it more. But I just thought I would mention that that one is open as well. I think that is it for me. I have some links here for you all. And then my contact information, and you're all welcome to reach out if you have interest in hearing more about any of these programs. So I think that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Abra. So everyone is aware, we will share any slides or presentations on our website. Something I'll mention too, we're building a resources page on the MWCC website that will have just some links and other helpful resources, as well as a funding table that we've just created. So I can share more about that later on in the next section of the agenda if we've got time. But with that, we'll keep moving on and move on to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. If Kyle is able to join, there he is. So Kyle,
can you hear me, Ethan? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, Tom couldn't be here today, so I'm going to fill in for him. My name is Kyle Tackett. I'm Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships. Live down in Dillon, but work statewide. And so I think this is a great opportunity, Ethan. We have been getting a lot of questions about the infrastructure bill, the funds we got or didn't get. So it's very timely. So thanks for the opportunity. I may not share slides. I may just talk through some things and then can send you some information a little later to send around. So let's just get to the infrastructure side of things first. So we got, as an agency, a little over $900 million. And that money was really divided into 3 buckets. And I want to back up and say, nationally, we got 900 million. This is not money that's sitting in our bank account both. So of the 3 buckets, about 500 million went into what's called the Watershed Flood and Prevention Act, WFPO, also known as PL 566. That's a public law that created it back in the 50s. And I'll spend some more time on that. The second bucket is what's known as our Watershed Rehabilitation Program. And about 118 million went into that bucket. And that is really dedicated just to rehabilitating dams that NRCS, and at the time was the SCS, constructed decades ago. And typically these funds go to those that are considered high hazard dams. So that's a pretty specific program looking at rehabilitation of dams that are were built for flood prevention. And the last bucket, about 300 million went into the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, EWP. EWP is an emergency type program that looks at protection from flooding and erosion due to natural disasters. That program is typically maxed out when you start looking at all the tornadoes, all the hurricanes, all the flooding that happens nationally. And so that 300 million was really just sent right to that to try to keep that program going and prop it. But what I do want to focus on, though, is that WFPO, that 500 million. And so that essentially doubled the amount of money in that program, with that 500 million being added to it. And it is, I'll be honest, it's a bit of a complicated program. It was created, like I said, I think in the 50s, mid 50s. Congress stopped stopped funding it years ago. And so typically states didn't staff up anymore as staff moved on, required or retired, or they moved them on. So states don't typically have staff anymore for this program. And now all of a sudden, the last decade or so, more money's been added, and now a lot has been added. And I'll get to why that's important in a second. PO 566 has several purposes. It's everything from broad watershed protection to flood mitigation, ag water management, water quality, soil erosion. And so as you can imagine, it's a really broad purpose of the program. But what's important for the infrastructure money is there are three priorities that this administration is putting on this money right now. And I think it's important to Montana for a couple of reasons. The first priority for this money is to address Western drought. Okay, I think we can all relate to that. The second is for states that typically haven't used this program. And Montana is one of those states that really has not used this program much in the past. And then the last one is to get at historically underserved communities. So those are the three priorities that the administration is putting on this money. And so when you start looking at Western drought, one of the biggest areas we are looking at in our CSYs is through addressing aging irrigation infrastructure and improving, that oftentimes century-old delivery network in big irrigation districts to get at that Western drought issue.
Kyle, I think you just muted yourself.
Must have hit a button. How about now?
You're good.
All right.
Thanks.
So I think I want to reiterate that this money is not sitting in Tom Watson's bank account in Bozeman. We have to request this money. And so there was a recent call for requests for money, and it was not fully met. So it's not really a deadline right now. It's really states are submitting requests to get at this money until it's gone. And so I want to walk through how we're using it and thinking about using it, maybe some opportunities for watershed. And so this program gets a little complicated in that we're talking a lot of money. So we're looking at working with the St. Mary's irrigation issue up on the High Line with the Milk River Joint Board of Controls to address that aging infrastructure up there. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars that we're trying to get at for that money. And so when we try to get at money of that kind, we may have to get at congressional authorization. So I just tell you that so you know that we're talking, typically these are big projects, big dollar projects. But the process looks a little bit like this. A sponsoring local organization is what it's called, and they have to request in writing that we write a plan for. And a sponsoring local organization, and I'll send Ethan a document when we're done, is really lays out who's eligible for this money. And typically, from an irrigation district standpoint, it has to be a district that has the ability to levy taxes for eminent domain, to handle money, to do O&M. And so it kind of lays out who's eligible. And I would say typically your typical watershed group or conservation district may not be that organization. It may be more of the irrigation district that's eligible. And so the money is really broken into what we call planning money and then implementation money. And to get at the planning money, we have to have a feasibility assessment done that allows us to say, is this really a place we want to be? Are there any red flags moving forward? And then, if we kind of get the green light, then we can request planning money. And that planning money would go to the organization such as an irrigation district that they would then contract out to a firm, planning group, an engineering firm to do the plan that's required. And when I say plan, really in your mind, think NEPA. This would be either an EA or an EIS, depending on the complexity of the project. You get under 24 million, and it's typically an environmental assessment. Anything over 24.9 million puts us into that EIS type And once that plan is written, if our chief approves it, then we can request construction money and then go out for construction. Anything over 25 million actually requires congressional authorization before we can even get construction money. And I know that's complicated, but I just want you to know this is not, I'm not trying to downplay this, but it is a program that's extremely complicated. Depending on the amount of money we're looking at, it may involve congressional authorization. So as an example, we'll use St. Mary's because it's one some people know about. We have a feasibility document that's been written by a group called the Farmers Conservation Alliance. So when I said we don't have staff, we don't have staff. And so we are paying a group out of Oregon called the Farmers Conservation Alliance to write these preliminary feasibility assessments and then the watershed plans ultimately if we we don't have the staff, we're not going to staff up, so we're going to rely on other groups. And they're not the only group out there, but through a competitive process, they were the group that applied to get it. And so when we look at this infrastructure bill, I want to reiterate, we're not sitting on EQIP, we're not sitting on CSP, maybe those typical buckets that producers are used to seeing. We don't have any money to do forestry work. It's really focused on PL 566 and even more focused on aging irrigation infrastructure. That's not it. There are other purposes, but when we start asking for money, we need to start checking boxes that address Western drought, underserved peoples. So Ethan, with that, I'll open it up to questions. I'm sure there are some, or if you want to move on and come back, we can do that as well. Just key, this money sits at headquarters. We don't have it. There's a very, I guess, rigid path to get at this money. In one way, I guess I'll end on where watershed groups could play a role, I think, is really in that organization with irrigation districts, maybe being that communications piece for them. Sometimes those groups may need a little organization, a little help to get moving down the road. When we're looking at updating irrigation infrastructure, it's really the districts that have to do it. They own the O&M on it, not necessarily the watershed groups. And we do work closely with Bureau of Rec, especially in that St. Mary's project where it is BOR owned assets. And so we can use this sort of program in conjunction with Bureau of Reclamation. So thanks, Ethan. We'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And we will maybe see how much time we have at the end and then address any questions. We can also record any questions in the chat box and follow up with folks to get some answers to those too. We don't have time to address those live. But
Sure.
Yeah, you again joining us. I think next we are going to have Eric join us. Eric will be speaking, I think, a little bit maybe to some EPA programs, and then also how that may relate to some Montana DEQ programs as well. So Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ethan. I'll share my screen in a second. I don't have slides, but I will show you some websites. So yep, as Ethan said, my name's Eric Trum. I manage the watershed protection section here at DEQ. That includes non-point source and the wetlands program. So one of the primary things we do is administer 319 project funding to address non-point source pollution across the state. A lot of you are familiar with the program. I'm not going to go into detail. That was not in the bipartisan infrastructure law. That funding comes through the federal budget. We get that funding from EPA. Congress just passed another short-term continuing resolution that expires March 11th. So we'll know more about that funding at that point. And then I guess, you know, as we go through this, there are still a lot of unknowns in terms of how this money is going to be released and what some of the guidance is. So we're waiting to hear more information from EPA, but let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, got it. So this is just EPA's website on the bipartisan infrastructure law, talking about water infrastructure investments. You know, Ethan can put some of these links up on the MWCC website. But this is the breakdown over the next 5 years of the infrastructure bill. There are billions of dollars going into improving water and water quality. A lot is focused on safe drinking water. That is, you know, implementing the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we administer, DEQ administers a lot of this funding in partnership with DNRC through the State Revolving Fund program. There is the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or Water Pollution Control State Revolving Fund, as some call it. So, you know, this year, Montana's total allocation for 2022 is a little over $63 million. And similar to the breakdown you see here nationally, a lot of that funding is going to the drinking water, the safe drinking water side. I think of that 63 million, a little over 50 is actually going towards those programs, with a heavy focus on this lead service line replacement. Again, not many details on how this will be administered, so I'm gonna kind of move on. More related to the work I know a lot of you folks are doing is through the Clean Water State Revolving Funds. So this is to implement the Clean Water Act. It uses intended to use a combination of federal and state funds. Again, this is in partnership with DNRC. DEQ kind of does the technical oversight program, program side of things. DNRC, they issue the bonds, obligation bonds, and they actually make the loans. And so I will also state, so the SRF, these are loan programs. So traditionally they've gone to construction or upgrades of municipal wastewater facilities, some decentralized wastewater treatment systems, in some cases, some green infrastructure. But another eligible use under this program is to control non-point sources of pollution. Because it's a loan program, it's been difficult it's more difficult for private entities to apply for those loans. Mark may go into more detail next on some of this, but it's just more difficult. There have been Montana has set aside 10% of this funding for a lot of irrigation loans, and those go for irrigation infrastructure improvements that address water quality. So again, there's been difficulty just in terms of, because it's a loan, private landowners opening up kind of their finances for the backing on these loans has been difficult. But we are, in conversations with DNRC, and I think with some of the increased funding here, trying to open up some more opportunities for our traditional non-point source type projects. And I will also point out, EPA just released some guidance for some best practices for financing non-point source, addressing non-point source pollution. So that's a big part of it. I guess I'll just show same website. Here's the breakdown where money is going in Montana. That's all linked through the same website. The other thing I want to mention, so DEQ receives funding. It's under 604B, their water quality management planning grants. That money is tied to the Clean Water SRF fund, so it's 1% of that grant. So back up, DEQ receives a grant every year to build this state revolving fund. So there's a think it's typically a $10 million capitalization grant received from EPA every year. That money is matched by the state and put out into loans and at very low interest loans, but some of that interest goes back to continue building that that revolving fund. What the infrastructure bill does is increases those capitalization grants. So this year there's going to be an additional $8,809,000 going towards clean water SRF, and that's going to be issued through that Clean Water State Revolving Fund. But those 604B are 1% of that. So, you know, over the next 5 years, what we've been told is that Clean Water SRF is effectively just doubling. So we expect to have double the funds for those water quality management planning grants. The purpose, as stated by EPA, is to really determine the nature and extent of water pollution, and then to develop plans to address those. What we've done typically is we support regional and volunteer monitoring efforts, monitoring and analysis. Last year, 9 groups received support from DEQ with a little over $30,000 for lab analysis fees. So collecting, you know, it's not funding the actual collection of the data, but it's the lab analysis associated with that. And then you know, Adam Sigler can talk a little bit more about that as well. He helps provide support to groups putting together sampling and analysis plans to make sure that data is, you know, collected, is quality data is being collected and input into our database as to be tracked over time. So again, waiting for some guidance from EPA, but we've talked about, you know, expanding some of that volunteer monitoring support, as well as supporting development of, you know, watershed restoration plans or other planning efforts using that additional funds. So again, a lot is wait and see. The other big pot of money that I'll talk about, so is that under protecting regional waters, those geographic programs, we have the Columbia River Basin Restoration Program. That's something EPA administers directly. Some of you may have applied for. It's the Columbia River Toxics. That's within that broader Columbia River Basin Restoration Program. So they're going to see about $80 million coming into that program. Again, that's the entire Columbia Basin. So Montana can expect to see some money from that. So that's about all I have. I need to stop sharing here. And I'm lost. I don't know. There we go. Stop sharing. Done. So yeah, sorry, there's not much details. We're still waiting from EPA, but that's a quick overview of what we hope to see. There's a lot of money coming to the state to improve water quality. And I think, you know, we'll continue to discuss opportunities with Ethan, you know, get any new information on the website, and, you know, feel free to reach out to us at any time. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. I realize we're kind of cruising through these updates, but we are going to have a break once we conclude this at about 11 o'clock or so. So next up, we're going to have Mark Bostrom from Montana DNRC give us an update from the card division. I do want to also just acknowledge that we don't really have anyone giving updates from forestry. You know, there will be significant amounts of money coming through the Forest Service, but also DNRC Forestry Division. That was just because of time constraints, but I would encourage everyone to attend the meeting that Jim Birchfield mentioned with MFC and their joint collaborative meeting in April to learn more about those forestry updates. But I will just pass things over to Mark to talk about some of the programs that they're going to be working with through the card division.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. Good morning, everyone. Mark Bostrom, I'm with DNRC. I'm going to take a little bit different tact here. I kind of want to show everyone really what the scale is of this bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IIJA as it's sometimes called. So I'm going to share a screen. What I have here is it's basically a spreadsheet that we're working with. Everyone see that? So this is a spreadsheet that we're working with from the governor's office to take a look at all of the different components of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I mean, this is the whole thing. This is every point in the bill. We call it the bill, that has an amount that's specified. And what we have here over here in this column H is who is the state agency that this funding is going to somehow connect with your orbit. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to be administering it, but it may be funding that the federal agency that you work with often is going to be administering it. So let me just scroll through this, and you might want to look away if blinky lights give you seizures. So you can see that this is a fairly extensive bill. So we're at row 200. Okay, now we are approaching the end of it. Yeah, there we go. So it's 363 different rows of funding, and the majority of these are millions, if not billions of dollars that are going to be expended nationwide on a number of these programs. So let me just sort it down to the ones that are in the sphere of influence for DNRC or other sister agencies. Okay, so here, this necks it down a little bit so that we can basically look through it in, basically 4 screen rolls. But some of these programs that have already been discussed by Kyle or Avra and Eric are all in here. So many of these we haven't even really sorted out, from the notes that are in here, what does this mean to the state? For instance, the National Dam Safety Program, that's a DNRC thing. Does that mean that we're running it? I don't know, probably not. But we do have a dam safety program here. So I just wanted to give everyone kind of a big picture look at what this is. And there are billions and billions of dollars that are coming this way. I'm going to stop sharing here really quick. The point that I would make with that is that as this funding, and we're seeing this in ARPA already, as this funding comes in, it's often taking and creating a cascade effect of the programs that we operate traditionally. So for example, with the Renewable Resource Grant Program, a lot of the funding that is backing that from the state side is being replaced by federal funding because those projects might qualify for ARPA. And so think about what that means for this next legislative session. That means that the Natural Resource Projects account that funds renewable resource grants is going to be chock full. So what I would emphasize, I guess, from the DNRC side, is to take a look at the traditional granting systems that already exist and have for years, like renewable resource, reclamation development, the forestry grant programs. Those are all going to benefit from either ARPA or this bipartisan infrastructure bill that is going to allow more money to flow through those, because there's a kind of a revenue replacement concept that's going on there. The other thing I'd emphasize is to take this opportunity to really position where your group is along the lines of what your project might be. So start or continue working on the partnerships and the collaborators, because there's going to be certain strings that are set up in these various opportunities. Some may only be able to go to state. Some may only be able to go to local government. So you want to work with them and start establishing your partnerships and collaborations so that you would have an opportunity to basically ride along on the train with the other people that would have the ability to access these funds. And I'm glad, I was super psyched to see that watershed fund presentation. That's certainly a great venue to work on capacity. And it works in conjunction with the programs that we have at DNRC, like the watershed management grants, as well as conservation district grants, 223s, and district development grants. If you're in a partnership with those people that have access to those specific funds, then everybody benefits. It does float all boats in a way when you have these large chunks of money coming in. The next thing I'd say is, basically, I'm going to also transition. I want Aaron Wall, who works for us now, to do a little bit to show how ARPA and the minimum allocation grants really kind of fit into this concept I'm talking about. So can we turn this over really quick to Erin?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think she has a slide.
Thanks, Mark. I will share my screen. Okay, do you guys see my slide for minimum allocation grant information?
Yeah.
Okay, so as you may know, so one of the pots of money for ARPA is the minimum allocation grants. And as part of that, there is a $150 million that was allocated to counties, cities, and towns. And to find out exactly how much the your local community got, you can look at our ARPA dashboard. And so basically, you just need to go to arpa.mt.gov, click on the little faucet for water and sewer grants, and then click on the minimum allocation grant program. And so there are two different categories of projects for the that qualify for ARPA. One is the drinking water SRF, and the other is the clean water SRF that Eric Trum mentioned a little bit earlier. So like he mentioned, non-point source projects are eligible, and planning efforts are eligible as long as they can lead to a project that would be eligible under the clean water SRF. Watershed groups, the types of projects that watershed groups would be interested in would not qualify under the drinking water SRF, just so you guys know. There is a one-to-one match required for the minimum allocation grants, and the dashboard that I had mentioned to see how much information, how much money these communities got is at the very, very bottom of the minimum allocation grant page. And if you go where it says applications and awards, you can see what projects have been awarded so far in Montana. For minimum allocation grants, DNRC is reviewing them on a monthly basis, but the last day to submit these applications is January 1st of 2023. That being said, each community is approaching how they are going to spend these minimum allocation grants a little differently. So I would encourage you guys to start these conversations early if you think that you might be interested in pursuing these funds, and just kind of get on their radar. So that's kind of the quick and dirty for minimum allocation grants, but please reach out if you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Erin. And I guess I'll just kind of conclude it. You know, I can't overemphasize that. You know, we're in already a very flush period of federal funds because of ARPA, and you know that's creating a cascading effect throughout all of the programs. So, you know, using this period now to position for when this bipartisan infrastructure law gets sorted out and all the federal guidance comes out, positioning yourself with the capacity through the DNRC and the MWCC opportunities and making partnerships with conservation districts, and then getting in the pool with the RRG and RDG and anti-forestry grants. Whatever the projects are that are really the emphasis of your group, you should be working those now, knowing that there's going to be a you know, kind of a long bleed out of funds over the next 3 to 5 years out of this bipartisan infrastructure bill. So I'll conclude it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, and also Erin for joining us. And just to reiterate what Mark said, you know, I think, you know, our goal with MWCC definitely is to try and help position communities and local organizations to form the partnerships they need, or to find the resources or capacity they need to somehow obtain funding and implement these projects in their watersheds. And that's going to be kind of the focus of this last part of the meeting that we'll start when we come back from the break, is understanding what some of the needs are and what some of the resource needs are for local groups. But we have one last guest speaker. So if Hannah is here, I will.
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So I will hand it over to Hannah to talk about some of the programs that kind of relate to infrastructure, natural resource infrastructure from disaster and emergency services.
Great, thank you. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So before I get started, I just want to let you guys know that this is a very condensed version of all of our funding programs. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us so we can get those answered. So to start, again, my name is Hannah Schultz. I am with Montana DES and I'm a mitigation coordinator. So here we have just our all of our funding opportunities. So starting with HMA, so Hazard Mitigation Assistance Funding, we have the BRIC program, which is Building Resilience Infrastructure in Communities. This is one of the newer programs, as you probably have heard, but it has replaced our PDM, which was the pre-disaster mitigation. So the BRIC, for this one, we have an annual national competitive application process. It is very competitive. I just want to put that out there. And this is also funded through the 6% set aside in the Disaster Relief Fund. Funding for this is not limited to damaged facilities or any geographic areas, and it is good for all multi-hazard mitigation projects. For BRIC, we will need a current or local regional hazard mitigation plan at time of application as well as award. And for the match for this one, it is 25%. So local match and FEMA or federal funds will cover 75%. Next one we have is the SMA program, which is our flood mitigation assistance. This one is also an annual and national competitive application process. The funding, again, is not limited to damaged facilities or geographic areas. For this one, of course, with flooding, it's for flood reduction projects, and the funding comes from the NOFO, so the annual, of course, now I'm forgetting the acronym, a Notice of Funding Opportunity. And then for this one, again, we will need a current local or regional hazard mitigation plan at the time of application and award. And for FMA, the local match can range from 25 to 0%, which is pretty interesting as well. So it can range from those. Next one, we have our HMGP and post-fire. So that's our hazard mitigation grant program. For HMGP, not post-fire, it is post-disaster as the timing of
the grant application cycle. For this one, we will need a local and regional hazard mitigation plan at the time of award. So if you don't have a plan during your application process, that's completely fine, because the award status, as I'll walk you through later in our timeline, can sometimes be a lengthy process. And so the funding for HMGP is given to, or priority is given to the jurisdictions that have been impacted by the disaster and are listed in the declaration. But if you're not in one of those jurisdictions, it's completely okay. You can still apply. You just may or may not get priority. And so the funding for this one is capped based on other Stafford Act costs. And then for the post-fire, the only difference for this one is the funding is based on the national aggregate calculation, which is based on the average of historical FMAGs from the past 10 years in the state. And so for this one, the match is also 25%. And so the next two ones, which are non-disaster grant programs, are NEHRP and HHPD. NEHRP is our National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program. So this application cycle is annual. It's not very competitive compared to the other ones. And then this one, of course, is for earthquake risk reduction projects in states and territories that are determined to have high or very high earthquake risk. And so to find this high earthquake risk analysis is in our state hazard mitigation plan. And the match for this one is 25%. And then HHPD, which is our last one, which is the high hazard potential dams grant. This also has an annual application grant cycle. The funding is limited, of course, to dams that are classified as high hazard potential dams by the state's dam safety program. And then the project categories for this one are for the repair, removal, or rehabilitation of eligible high hazard dams. And this one, you will need a current local or regional hazard mitigation plan at time of award. And the match for this one is 35%. But I do want to put this out there for the HHPD, although it does have a high match percent requirements. If the project is dam related, you can apply in the HHPD, but you can also apply it in our HMGP program or the BRIC program. So it's very fluid in that sense of where you can put that in different grant programs. So you don't have to pay the full 35 or have the full 35% match. And then the next slide here, I just want to bring your attention to the right side of the screen, which is the period of performance for each of these grants. So for BRIC and FMA, at application selection, that's kind of when it starts. So that period of performance is 36 months. For HMGP and post-fire, it starts at the opening of the application period. So that's when the 36 months begins. For NEHRP, it is 12 months from the start date, and then HHPD is 36 to 48 months upon award acceptance. And then I also do want to note that if anything comes up during this grant cycle and you will need an extension, we can always submit that proposal to FEMA, and most likely you can get up to a year extension, sometimes two, depends. And then next, if you don't know where to find any mitigation project ideas or strategies, you can always look to the capital improvement plan or the local hazard mitigation plan. We also have a handy dandy resource. I believe it's from FEMA, but it's a mitigation strategy handbook that also has really great project ideas that you can look at if nothing has popped up into your mind so far throughout this presentation. You can always look there for ideas as well within the community. And then here are just some eligible project types as well. And this goes for practically all of our programs, except for, of course, the earthquake and dam specific ones. So you can do project scoping and advanced assistance, regular plans, public education and outreach, wildfire mitigation, flood after fire, utility line burial, and generators. And then here we have our application process. So if you are interested in applying to any of our programs, we will need, the mitigation section will need a notice of intent from you. And you can find these notices of intent on our website at des.mt.gov. And you could just go straight to the mitigation page and it should be on the first page. If not, you can click into one of our programs and it will be there as well. And so once you fill out this notice of intent and send it to us, we can kind of start the application process and walk you through everything. If you guys have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out, and we will assist you in that sense. And then once we have your completed application internally at Montana DES, we will rank it if we have more than one application, and we have our own scoring index to do so before we submit it to FEMA, because FEMA requires us to rank them. And next, of course, we have the FEMA submission, then FEMA reviews all of the applications. And if that is approved, we will come to the award stage where Montana, or we will award the grant to the jurisdiction, and then is project implementation. So then you can start the grant process and projects process. So that's, again, very high overview. I'm trying to go quickly because I know you guys have a break. But this is my last slide. These are our current funding opportunities. So we have our COVID event, which opened last October, and our applications are due to us June 1st. So the available amount is a little over 4 million. Next is our 2021 FMAG, which opened last October as well, and is due March 1st with a little bit over $2 million. And then we have our wind event, which opened last December and closes July 1st of 2022. And we have, like you can see, 300,000. And I believe some of our application deadlines will be extended. So we are just in the process of requesting that through FEMA. So right now these are the dates, but don't let that scare you or go away from if you want to apply. Also, please just feel free to reach out to us. If you do have any questions, we can walk you through that process. And then here is me and my team. So if you guys do have any questions, please just reach out. We would love to walk you through every single process. And if you have an idea of a project, but you don't know if it's going to be feasible, we can also walk you through that process as well. And we can have conversations with FEMA as well to see if that is in the books. But that is all I have. And just, I guess, reach out to us if you have any questions.
Yeah, Hannah, thank you so much for sharing that. And thanks to all of the speakers who joined us to give some of those updates from your agencies. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, but at least we hopefully gave some people some ideas of things to be thinking about and what some of the opportunities might be that are coming forth. You know, just a reminder too, we are going to be able to share all the presentations and slides on the website. We'll also have a recording for this meeting on the website available too, so you can go back and watch this. And another thing that I'll mention briefly is that we are building kind of a landing page on our website too, to act as somewhat of a clearinghouse of information that becomes available. Right now, we're still trying to unpack things, but as there's a little bit more direction on where funding is going to be delivered and from, you know, what angles, we'll have those resources available, as well as other you know, webinars and other things that agency partners put on to help provide some insight and some direction on this. We'll try to compile as much of that as we can and have it in one central place on the website. So just be on the lookout for that too. But we're a little bit over our time, so I will dismiss everyone for a quick break. We might just try to do it in 5 minutes or so if that seems feasible. And then we'll come back here and I'll give a little bit more instruction on how we're going to move things forward from there with our small group breakout sessions. But thank you again to everyone. I appreciate it. If you don't plan on sticking around for those breakout sessions, feel free to go ahead and just log off from Zoom now so that we don't put you in one of those breakout rooms by mistake. So thank you so much. We'll be back here at about 11:15. We may have opportunities or a need to also just follow up and reach out to people. But we certainly want to, you know, share this with all of you as well. So once we've had time to kind of digest everything and go through these different notes and the slides, we want to create just a compilation of what those different challenges that you acknowledged are, and then also what some of the ideas are that we can work with our partners, at the state or national level to hopefully try to put in place to overcome some of those different barriers and those bottlenecks. I realize we're at time though, it's noon. I'm standing between everyone and lunch now. And it's been a really busy morning. We've had a lot of presentations, a lot of information thrown at everyone. I just want to thank you all for being here and for joining us. And my only regret is that we weren't in person together, but it's really great to see everyone's faces nonetheless. I look forward to hopefully connecting with everyone in person soon. But on behalf of all of us, I just want to thank you. So thanks to Terry and all the board members who helped organize the meeting and put this on. And thanks to everyone who attended and provided your feedback. If you have any questions of us, reach out anytime. We will record all the questions that were in the chat box too, in case there were any things that went unanswered, and we'll try to get responses to those things as well. But if anyone has any parting thoughts, feel free to share those. Otherwise, we'll see you all very soon, I hope.